Hello everyone, and welcome to Creating Smart, Sustainable Campuses for International Students, a webinar discussion held in collaboration between Times Higher Education and Western Union Business Solutions. My name is Alistair Lawrence, and I'm the Special Project Secretary for THE. I'll be chairing the discussion today, and I'm delighted to be joined by a panel of senior leaders from academia and industry, who are Rob Davis, Director of Intercultural Programs at University of California, Davis, Martin Raymond, co-founder of Future Laboratory, Peter Ricketts, President and Vice Chancellor of Arcadia University, Camille Rutherford, Vice Provost International, Brock University, and Skylar Webster, Director of Global Products at Western Union Business Solutions. I'd like to take a moment just to let our panel introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about their institution and their role. Rob, can we start with you, please?
Sure. UC Davis is about 8,000 international students and additional 2,200 international scholars, visiting researchers. And my role is to provide extracurricular learning opportunities for all students in the area of global education for all and intercultural learning.
Thank you very much. Martin, come to you next, please.
Oh, yes. Just as our name would suggest, the Future Laboratory is a forecasting and consultancy service that really looks at what's new and next in the future. So really, we were working with Western Union to look at what students would be thinking about doing and I guess behaving over the next decade. So hopefully some interesting findings from both the report and the panelists tonight.
Great, thank you. Camille, you can introduce yourself next.
Hi, I'm Dr. Camille Rutherford from Brock University. We're just outside of Toronto. What makes it easier for people to realize where we are? We can see Niagara Falls from the 12th floor of the administrative building. So we are very close to one of the world's global most recognized locations, and it is definitely a big draw for all visitors and our international students as well. We are a campus of 19,000 students. We have over 2,000 international students, primarily from China, India, Nigeria, and Bangladesh, a very growing area for us. Looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Camille. Peter? Sorry, I think you're on mute, Peter.
Thank you. My name is Dr. Peter Ricketts. I'm the President and Vice Chancellor at Arcadia University. And Arcadia University is located in a small university town in Nova Scotia, Canada. If we're talking about wonders of the world, we're right next to the Bay of Fundy with the highest tides in the world, about 13 meters of tides. And we are a small, predominantly undergraduate. We do have graduate programs, but a small university of about 3,500 students. And we provide a very residential and in-person model of education.
Great, thank you. And Skylar, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Skylar Webster. I lead our product development team in the education vertical at Western Union, and we help top universities around the world manage their international financial processes. So whether that's sending or receiving money to international students, we work with 8 of the top 10 universities in the Times Higher Education World Academic Rankings, and we really do have a client base around the world. So we kind of have that global perspective of the challenges and the opportunities that's facing international students and the education sector right now.
Brilliant. Thank you all very much for joining us today. Creating smart, sustainable campuses for international students has become a more complex challenge because of the ongoing restrictions imposed by the pandemic and also the constant changes to technology. And while universities continue to innovate and find new solutions for digital and blended learning, they now face new challenges about how best to engage with international students in both the months and the years ahead. So to begin with, I'd like to ask the panel how international students' expectations of teaching have changed since March. Anyone would like to? Oh.
I mean, I can go ahead. I would say that we've learned something about the virtual environment and that obviously it's extremely fatiguing. It's not ideal, but I think the expectation coming back is that there are certain elements of it that we want to keep. I think to fully engage international students, there really invite them into learning. I think things like maintaining live chat functions so that people who aren't as strong in English might be able to continue to contribute is going to be important. I also think really nuts and bolts things like office hours, allowing students to lurk in office hours, come to office hours, maybe not come right out with a question. In the past, office hours were a private thing. Now we're seeing that people are coming together for office hours, and my question may not be your question, but when I hear you ask it, it makes me realize I'm not alone. And it also answers a concern that I have. So I think some of the features that we've developed and had to use in a virtual environment, it's going to be important to keep them, to give international students the confidence that, number one, their questions are the same as domestic students. And number two, if their language isn't quite there, they have other means to engage the material.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Martin, I saw you nodding along to Rob's point. Does this tally with research work you've done for Future Laboratory?
You know, more so than people think. I think originally when we talked about the smart campus, a lot of us were thinking about, you know, the way we paid things, for example, on campus, the way we had some of us virtual assistants were beginning to be introduced. The notion that there was some limited webinar connectivity, and you know, to the speaker's point there about how we were using it to allow students to connect, I think, in more conversational ways. But if you think about it now, when we were doing our survey, we said to students, what do you think about the virtual campus? And they were saying, actually, we want virtual reality, we want augmented reality, we want extended virtual reality. So suddenly their expectations, both going into COVID, and when I did a recent catch up with some of them coming out of it, they were really way ahead of how a lot of us are understanding the current campus experience. And I was thinking, actually, what they were describing is how the workplace of tomorrow will begin to look and feel like. So a lot of them were already describing not what just the university experience could be, but how they're expecting the world to behave over the next decade. So really, I guess, as academics and as kind of forecasters and as thinkers, we really have to look at the gaps that we are seeing between expectation and reality and work out how we can, you know, fill those in over the next 3 to 5 years. Because otherwise students, as they were telling me recently, you know, if those things are not there as a given, why are the extras being charged for it if they're not getting these things that they now expect in the world around them? They expect them increasingly on, you know, university and in campus life.
Great, thank you. Scarlett, go ahead, please.
I was just going to, you know, add to what Martin's saying and closing that gap. I actually think, you know, and I've had many conversations with, you know, universities around the world. That gap is so much smaller now, post COVID or you know, after COVID hit. We're not really post it yet, unfortunately, but that gap is actually so much smaller now because it really is impressive what has been done in terms of that digital experience. And I think we are in much better situation than we would have been in the academic environment had COVID not hit. I think that whole hybridity with the flexibility between the work life and personal life, we're closer to that. It does look more like the office place. I think, you know, students now, 58% of them say that they would consider offline and online presence of equal importance. And I think that's definitely true because, like Rob said, they're experiencing fatigue. So at one point they may have been saying we want more online. Now I think they're really recognizing the balance of both. So
great, thank you. Camille, can I come to you next? Just I saw you nodding in agreement, and also I wondered if you could also maybe speak to Rob's point about is there an extra opportunity to include and answer the concerns of international students that maybe overcomes a cultural barrier for some of them by moving things online?
I think one of the things that we've definitely seen, and students are looking for a much more flexible and connected to what Martin said, a multimodal experience. Whereas before everything was, you know, analogous to be two-dimensional. I was in class and I did something on pen and paper. That's probably about it. And now they're looking for a much more dynamic when it comes to opportunities to connect with their instructors, with the content, with their peers. They don't want just one time. Because definitely we know with international students, the biggest challenge is the different time zones. And so they want synchronous and asynchronous opportunities because they don't all want to be up at 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, and doing their classes. So they want that flexibility to build into that those opportunities. The thing I think that's really interesting about what international students want, but it's what we have learned in higher ed. One, we've learned it's possible. All these courses that we had, they said, oh no, we could never be online. Now they've done it. And they've proven. And they've proven then, like, there's all these great resources that we never even looked at or considered in the past. So that's been a great learning experience. But as well, then what our international students have taught us is a better understanding of technology, access, and resources globally. Because before, we never talked about different time zones. We never talked about VPNs. We never talked about firewalls. We never talked about, oh, wait, you can't access Google from different parts of the world. And that has been a really important lesson that our international students have taught us and made us much better prepared and more future ready to be more dynamic and flexible. That they've really brought in their global experiences to us, and that's benefited us as a campus.
Great, thank you. Peter, can you tell us a little bit how the international student offering at Arcadia has changed as well?
Yeah, I think, look, I agree with the points that have been made by the panelists. I think we've learned an awful lot during this last, almost getting on for a year now, hard to believe. But we've learned a lot about, online education and the use of digital technology, because of course we've done something that we virtually never do in universities. We've forced people to do something. We've actually told people, you have to go online, and they actually did it because there was no other alternative. And that's a very rare event in universities. We usually try to work in a much more collegial basis and building support, from the bottom up. But this forcing of people to be, to go online has allowed people to, first of all, get through the fear of doing it and actually getting on and doing it, and then finding out that there are actually some incredible benefits of doing this, but there are some real challenges as well. And for a place like Arcadia, people come to Arcadia University because of the educational model that we provide, which is a very much an in-person, on-campus, community-based experience. It is, if you like, an immersive learning experience in our campus and in our community. And so the challenge of moving online was huge because it was almost, seen as the antithesis of the educational model that we provide. And yet, we've been able to work and find ways to engage students and to find ways to use the technology to create new ways of engagement, new ways of connectivity. But, there's no doubt that our students, and particularly our international students, have found it challenging. And we did survey our students towards the end of last term. And the main thing they were finding was the lack of human connectivity, and that human experience. And that's something that they do really, really miss. And the international students miss it perhaps even more than the domestic students, because the reason they've come to Arcadia is because they want to meet other students, they want to meet Canadians, they want to meet people of other international backgrounds as part of their experience. And having that stifled, it has been a huge problem for them. And the other thing that they found was that that we weren't adapting or maybe we had adapted too much the way in which we were assessing people. So out went the end of term exam and all of the stresses associated with that, but in place came suddenly you're doing 5 courses, and now you have 5 weekly tests, weekly exams, all of this sort of, continuous assessment throughout the term. And suddenly students were finding that they had no time for themselves and no time to connect, because the workload had shifted enormously. And that was something that we've tried to work on this term to try and address some of those issues. So we've learned a lot, the good, the bad, and the ugly out of this experience.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Scarlett, did you want to add something to that? Or
mean, the only thing I'd add, Peter, is I think some of the challenges that add to that as well is that the diversity of the student body that comes internationally, right? And the fact that the global pandemic is recovering at different paces and different economies. And so not only are you trying to say, oh, what's your experience, international student, but it may look different in China than it does in India, than it does in Korea. So I definitely think there's some challenges there.
I just wanted to add one thing, Peter, this idea that people were forced to go online. I don't want to step on anybody's toes, but I think that some professors thought about pedagogy for maybe the first time. They really thought about what it means to engage students, what it means. We're not sitting in a lecture hall anymore, everybody facing forward. All of a sudden we have, maybe I can put students together to talk. And I think that there were more conversations about engagement, about presenting material in different ways, about using the asynchronous for just fact-based reading and the in-person for discussions in ways that I think are going to influence the classroom, the in-person classroom going forward. And it's beyond time, because those pedagogical analyses are really, really critical to engaging students fully in the learning. So it's not just a technological issue, but it's really just going back to the basics of teaching.
Absolutely. And if I could just quickly, I had a fascinating conversation with one of our top teachers at the end of last term. We was on campus and ran into him. And I really was interested in his experience, because this is somebody who's a superstar in the classroom and in teaching students. And I was asked, his experience. And he said that he was learning some really interesting new ways of approaching pedagogy and rethinking some of the things. And this was going to change the way he taught, when we did get back to some sort of more normal situation. So you're absolutely right. It forced you. And, I had a class too that I was just, co-teaching, and it was just one particular lesson in the class, but I had to put it online. And I learned a lot just doing that one class and putting that. So the pedagogical lessons that we've learned here are going to be very important.
I think one of the things which surprised me when I was chatting and actually doing the research for the report was how, prior to COVID, when we started the conversation, quite a lot of students were asking questions about, why not have more blended learning? Why not spend more time online, more time in virtual webinars? But recently, last week, for example, I caught up with about 10 of them in different cities and in different countries. And guess what? All of them were bemoaning the fact that they could not be with people face to face. And I said, so what were the things that you were missing? Yes. And they said, well, actually, here are the things. We missed the understanding of how you learn is by seeing and doing as well as listening and reading, understanding the methodologies of how co-creativity, for example, when you're creating something or collaborating something, how the ethics, and as somebody said, the aesthetics of that works, and also just generally what in conversation, quite a lot of what the professors, the kind of academic boards and the students themselves were exchanging was non-verbal. So they said suddenly they understood the realities of campus life and also the reasons for being present versus the reasons or the desires to be absent. I remember when I started out as an academic, which is about 20 years ago, I spent all my time trying to get my students onto campus, into the classroom, into webinars, etc. And I realized that their job was to basically evade me and avoid me and to go elsewhere. And suddenly now, for the first time, we are seeing students coming back, and that desire to be present and with us in those spaces suddenly overwhelming. So again, I think there's a huge opportunity to reinvent, how this classroom, this campus, this place looks. I mean, one professor I interviewed, he said, Martin, if we invented a time machine and went back to the 18th to 19th century and plucked an academic out of a classroom and placed him or her, in this case him, because he said you wouldn't have that many women teaching them, but into the current university environment, would they find it difficult to adopt? And the answer, of course, was no, they wouldn't. Hardly anything would have changed. changed in some ways. So really, what we should be using this is a really good way to look at, what are the great things, to everybody's point, to Rob's point, that we've learned out of this? What are the things we now want to park? But also, given that everybody is talking about this term blended and blended learning, what does that mean? Now that we've experienced everything, how do we carve that out? And more importantly, how do we co-create that new journey with the student who desperately, desperately wants to be back and active and present in a way that really, I think, even shocked students themselves?
Thanks, Martin. I mean, I think it's a really interesting point, because we've clearly, from the sound of it, gone from one extreme to the other. And as Peter mentioned, it's a forced change as well, which carries with it a different dynamic. I was wondering if those of you who have experience of dealing directly with international students could perhaps speak about what you think the individual, what the challenges are for the individual during this period, and how the university can support them, and how you've tried to address that. Camille?
I think I'm going to go back to something Peter said a little while ago, was about the humanizing experience, that human touch. And personally, I think, learning is a social activity. And that's part of what makes it really rewarding. So we've had to be very pragmatic and step back about what is it that students are getting from this experience. And when we look at them as an individual human, what is it they need out of that? They need those learning experiences that give them opportunity, as Martin was saying, to connect and collaborate with their peers. And we also need that outside of the classroom. And that is one of the biggest gaps that we all took for granted. Then as you're walking outside of the class, you bump into people. And that's how you get to meet people and meet new friends. And especially for international students, those are the opportunities they had to informally connect and interact with domestic students. And so now we have to be very much more pragmatic at how do we build that in. We cannot just leave it to chance that they're going to bump into each other walking out of class, that they have those opportunities. And now we have to plan for them to have those opportunities to connect and to collaborate with their peers. And so for us at Brock University, we very early on pivoted very quickly to digital support services and online support services and doing things. So we're very active with our social media accounts. We have a lot that's happening on Instagram, because that's where the students are. But we also use WeChat in a number of different areas to try to create these opportunities for students to connect with each other, to befriend each other, to see their common interests and things like that. And those are all the things in that we would have just sort of left to happenstance, because they're on campus. There's lots of things, there's lots of clubs. And now we have to be very pragmatic in one, nudging them to understand the opportunities. And one of the challenges with international students is a different cultural perspective of what the academic experience is about. So definitely for our students and at Brock University, we have a very strong focus on experiential education, that they should be engaging in service learning or work integrated learning, co-ops and opportunities and things like that. And for our international students to realize that's what helps you to get the path to getting a job, that those volunteering and service learning opportunities are really important. So we have to nudge our students to say, yes, you should be seeking out online clubs to participate in. You should be seeking out these opportunities, whether those are on Instagram or things like that. And because we had probably at the beginning of the academic year, and we've been online since last March, we're still online. We do have a few of our upper level and graduate level, especially wet-based labs that are open and social distance, but we are primarily online, and we'll be online for the spring and summer, and we'll be opening back up in the fall. So when we knew this is going to be not just a few weeks, not just a few months, this is going to be quite a bit, we started making those plans of how do we ensure that we support those students. Last fall, we had about half of our international students in Canada and half were still at home. So we started doing things like creating global peer communities so that students in India could connect to other students that were still in India, that they would have opportunities to be able to do that. That's also, connecting back to what Skylar had said, is that the pandemic is different in different parts of the world. Certain areas are opening up quite a bit and certain areas are different, still locked down. So we had to be pragmatic about creating those opportunities when possible for international students to connect with each other in person, but as well online, and nudging them to understand to get the most out of the Brock learning experience, it's in the classroom and outside of the classroom. You need to participate in all these different activities. So we've been very pragmatic about service learning, community opportunities, volunteering, and things like that. Part of our success has been our willingness to pivot to online, that we're not using traditional platforms. We're not just using our LMS, but we do use that. But we do a lot on Instagram. We do a lot on WeChat. We do a lot in even, we've acquired game show software to be able to host different events like that. So I think it's just the same way that now that we are very pragmatic about our online learning experiences and how to best support students, that we've been able to do that. But I think across the sector, we all need to be very pragmatic about how are we building in those human connections and those opportunities for students to connect with each other, because we know that that is what they are missing so much, because they may be kind of locked into their small room at home and not have opportunities to get out in the community. So we know that we have to support them to support their mental health and their support as well. And just when I'm on the topic of mental health, that we've been working with different service providers. And so we also have multilingual mental health support services that have 1-800 numbers, which was interesting because our students said, well, I don't know how to dial into a 1-800 number. Because that was not something that they even really considered before. Or, 1-800 numbers are generally within your country or your region. And so making sure that we had multiple phone numbers for them to be able to call in, to be able to participate in multilingual mental health supports. Because if you're in crisis and you are having some challenges, you don't want to go through the cognitive challenge of translating what your problems, your challenges are, to try to work with someone that's there to support you. So those are just some of the things that we've been doing and working on to ensure then that our students are supported inside the classroom and outside the classroom.
Great, thank you. It's really interesting to hear those case studies. If Peter, can I come to you next and Rob after that?
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to pick up because I think a lot of what Camille says is really important as to how we've been able to pivot and try and replace in some way those social and cultural interactions that occur outside the classroom. And at Arcadia here, we're a little different in the sense that we have had in-person classes in the fall and in the current term. We have about 40% of our classes are fully online, 40% are hybrid, so there's an in-person, but also you can take the course online as well, and then about 20% are in-person only. So we have had two groups of international students, ones that have been on campus, and these are largely students who are, returning students who did not go home over the summer. They stayed in Canada or stayed close to us, and so they're on campus or in the community, and they are, having challenges, in the sense that they're not getting the same experience, of course, that they would want, but at the same time they are able to interact with other students in ways in which we're trying to create opportunities for students to get together, while at the same time, of course, following all the public health protocols of social distancing and maximum sizes and all of that, wearing masks, etc. And then we have the other group of international students who are online, and particularly last term, they couldn't travel here. We were able to receive quite a number of them in January, and so we do have some of our first year international students on campus now, and it is it is a challenge trying to make sure that they get the kinds of supports that they need, because we're trying to address both the in-person supports and at the same time support the students that are online, and because they haven't been able to travel here yet. So there are really big challenges on this, but in the end, I think we're learning a great deal that will help improve the quality of service and support that we do provide, post-COVID. And but I think having the ability, and we've only been able to have the ability of on-class courses because on-campus courses. Because the epidemiology within Nova Scotia and the region we have has been very well maintained as far as COVID is concerned, and we've been able to do that. But the final point on this I'll just make is that a lot of people have said to me, well, post-COVID, with everything going online and all the digital, isn't your model of education at risk? And my response to that is, well, no, because for the very reason that Martin was raising, is that if you ask anybody, what are you missing? It's being able to hug someone, or being able to talk, see someone's face and see their person and interact with them personally. And I think there's quite an interesting opportunity for us to promote the fact that education is that social, cultural, and personal experience. And so while the digital developments, there's going to be huge opportunities and huge changes, it's not going to replace that fundamental element of international education, which is to be in another country, to be in a group of other students, to meet people from different backgrounds and learn from them and learn from those experiences.
Right, thank you, Peter. Yeah, I think, sorry, it's a point we perhaps should have noted earlier, that, Peter, your location means that your exposure is actually minimal at the moment, I believe, in the area where you are. So you do have a little more flexibility to carry on in person. Yeah,
it is. I mean, there's still very strict guidelines in place, which is why it's minimal. But it has been minimal, and it has allowed us to to do on-campus things which many other universities have not been able to do just because of their local epidemiology. Great, thank you. Rob, if we come to you now, I mean, this reminds me of a point that you've made previously, which is one of the key questions is how do you sort of broaden the access points and the entry points for international students, both, I assume, during this period and post-COVID, when you're putting together the type of programs and support that we previously heard about?
Well, I mean, I think two kind of distinct points. Programmatically, I think peer mentoring, lots of schools have it. I think we've realized that we really have to expand it and begin to invite students into the learning environment, onto the campus, months before they even plan to arrive, through matching them with peer mentors. And that requires good training of peer mentors, and it really requires an expansion of that program and encouraging international students, first year especially, to connect to that mentor. It's a way to connect with a domestic student perhaps, or another international, but an upperclassman, someone who's been there. Another whole area, and I'm sure all of the schools represented here have robust advising. We have career advising, we have academic advising at the college and at the major level. We have, for international students, we have regulatory advising, we have tutoring. I think a real key that we've learned, number one, is we can be a lot more flexible in that advising. So it's not come to our office hours, but now we're learning what are the best times, and we can do it virtually. I think that's another thing we've learned here, is that we can restructure the supports to students to meet their needs. And the advisors I'm talking to are saying, I'd love that kind of flexible schedule as long as I know what it's going to be. But critical to that too, and this kind of takes it back to the old school, right? Not only do students need to build relationships, but we need warm handoffs between all of those advising. I think we've learned that every door needs to be the front door, especially for international students. If an international student comes in and says, I'm having a regulatory issue, it's also an opportunity to say, how's it going academically? And to provide a warm handoff, not, oh, you can go talk to your academic advisor, but here's your academic advisor, and this is what they need to know. How do we do that? This is what I mean by old school. We need to build relationships between the advisors. I mean, these are highly trained professionals, and we can't just have international students know that they're available. They need to be integrated. And we do that through building relationships with one another. Oh, I know Rob Davis over there in Services for International Students and Scholars. He can help you with this issue. I'm going to give him a call. I'm going to connect him. That's going to be the key, is the flexible advising, which is a critical service, but also the way that advisors hand off and create a single front door entry for all the needs of international students, which can be quite complex, as we know.
Absolutely.
It's interesting, just very quickly, I was involved in the late 1990s, I'm dating myself a bit, but in a report for what was then the Association of Universities and Colleges of Canada, which is now Universities Canada, which is the national organization of universities here in Canada. And it was a report on international education and how Canadian universities were treating international students back then. And one of the big issues that came out was this, the way in which we were treating them and the way they were being treated in terms of dealing with their particularly unique problems and issues that were quite different from domestic students. And we actually entitled that document "A Warm Welcome," because in the end, that's what it was all about, and that's what was missing in a lot of occasions. So it was quite interesting that you make reference to that now.
Is one of the key challenges that will emerge as we move forward and restrictions become less of an issue, just how the physical space is going to change on campus for students in terms of what is allotted in terms of classroom space, what is allotted in terms of study space, what is allotted in terms of space for socializing, because I think one of the key challenges that everyone will note is that when you move everything online, there is a problem with access, which is not just to do with having the right devices, but also having the space to learn, the space to study. Will your institutions be reevaluating how they use physical space, if all the restrictions were lifted tomorrow? Camille?
I think one thing to be cognizant of, and this can be different in different locations and different across the globe. One of my biggest challenges is related to quarantining students. So in Canada right now, we supervise the quarantine of our students, and we have chosen to quarantine our students on campus. We have been very lucky that very early on, we decided to, we have a large number of townhouse suites. And so instead of quarantine students in a hotel room, which is basically a 12 by 12 box, not that cushier than a prison cell, but at times not a lot bigger, that we chose to quarantine our students in our townhouses because they have a single entry point, and that's helped to sort of mitigate spread for us. It also then means they have more room to spread out. So we're putting students for those 14 days in a townhouse so that they have a living room, they have a kitchen, they have a bedroom, they can spread out, they don't go quite as stir crazy. So again, when you talk about different ways of using our physical space, that has been an area that we did a lot of time on, because if you talk to students that have been quarantined in more traditional spaces, it is very debilitating on them. It is very, very challenging for them. And so that's been a great benefit for us. And going forward, that we call it a landing pad. So now that students, as they enter the country, even if they're not going to live on campus for the entire academic year, they still can quarantine on campus free at no charge. And so we call it the landing pad. So they can come into the landing pad for the 14 required days of quarantine, or they can stay for an entire month. And now we're going to be sure to continue that. So in the summer, that as we are transitioning to in-person, and we have more of our students will be coming in. So we've had about 500 that we've had to quarantine throughout the year, and they're coming all throughout the semester at different times. That will encourage them to come. We generally start around Labor Day, which is September 1st, that they have to be here before August 14th so that they can complete their quarantine. We'll be encouraging to stay at the landing pad for the entire month. And if they're going to move off campus, then they would move at the start of the month and start their new lease with that. But as well, because they're on campus, we can ensure then they have ready access to our COVID nurse to supervise their quarantine. But they have ready access. First of all, they have great bandwidth, so they can use the university network. So as they're getting to their classes, that they are very comfortable with that. They can look out the window and see the other resources that are available at the university as well. So that's one of the ways that we've been talking about utilizing our physical space, but that's also then as we look at our opportunities for our students to interact and connect with our domestic students. So even though our students are quarantining in the townhouses they're quarantining are where our domestic students are as well. So they are physically close. So when they're finished their quarantine, if they're living on campus, they're fully integrated with our domestic students as well. And that's important life lessons for our international students and our domestic students as well. But again, definitely looking at our physical space and how do we ensure that we have lots of connection points for our international students, that we are not segregating them. And I know there's lots of places that have absolutely beautiful international centers, but we want to make sure that our students are integrated and have as many opportunities as possible to interact and connect and collaborate outside the classroom with our domestic students as well. So even though we have an international building, we will be using that less and less and doing more of our events to integrate them with the mainstream community as well. But looking at how you are quarantining your students is really important because it sets them up to be successful. And there have been lots of examples of students that had mental health challenges as they have been isolated. I've moved to a new country, my first time away from home, and now you've locked me in a box for 14 days. And the food that you are sending me, I don't like because it's not the food that I've grown up with. So those are all things that we really looked at very carefully and planned. And if you set your students up to be successful and have a successful quarantine experience, it really gets them the opportunity to start them up to be successful for their academic experience as well.
Great, thank you. Peter, did you have a point to add along those lines?
Well, yes, I think I think there will be implications on spaces. In terms of our sort of social space and how our students mix, we have a beautiful campus, and it's in a beautiful location, and indeed the beauty of our campus and the historical buildings and the nature of it, is one of the things that really sells a lot of people to Arcadia, because it is so idyllic in many ways. It's sort of your quintessential liberal education college, if you like. And so we get a lot of interaction. And one of the things that I've noticed is, I've worked at larger institutions in the past, and what international students would say to me in those institutions is that, look, I had a great time here, had a great education, but I wish I'd met Canadian students. And so, it's always been up in my mind that what's very important about providing international students an international experience is that they actually get to meet Canadian students. And of course, we want Canadian students to meet our international students, because the educational benefits are, flow both ways, as we know. So I think from that side, our space is not going to change so much unless there are sort of continuations of restrictions, because, we don't know what the vaccine is going to give us. Is it going to give us, short-term protection and require boosting? Is it going to give long-term immunity? Is it going to deal with, mutated variants of the virus? So there's a lot of unknowns, but assuming that we get a vaccine that allows us to get back to some sort of normalcy, I don't see those spaces. But I do see our teaching spaces changing. And that goes back to what Rob was saying earlier, and the pedagogical discussion, which is that because a lot of professors now have experienced the online, and some of them have, probably experienced it and said, it was a good reason why I didn't do that. But others have found really, this is really interesting. And there's some really great things that I want to use when we get back to normal. And so I think this will help us move forward on changing some of our more passive traditional learning spaces into more active learning spaces, and to sort of reconfigure the classroom we were doing it a bit, but I think now that will be pushed forward simply because more of our professoriate has actually seen the benefits of doing that, and will hopefully want to include that in their redesigning of their courses as we go forward. So I see a lot of beneficial changes that will occur as to how we configure and reconfigure our teaching spaces on campus.
Great, thank you. Rob, if I come to you next, to Peter's point, do you think that the physical space and cultural integration that Camille and Peter were talking about will go hand in hand with the way that the curriculum has been modernized during this period?
I think there's the potential for it. To the point of, we've faced the same challenges as other schools in terms of how do we get international and domestic students really talking to each other, right? It's a challenge. It's something we all want. Certainly international students want it. I think domestic students want it. I think one of the opportunities with this pedagogical shift, and I think it's happening, is that just because people are using quick small group chats as part of their regular teaching now, because they can so easily. Think of a traditional classroom. You're sitting in rows. for a professor to stand up there and say, now let's get into small groups and talks, you got to physically, it's just really, really not designed for that. The online learning space is, I'm going to put you in rooms and you're going to talk. And all of a sudden, people who have never done that are saying, this is pretty cool. Like students are talking to each other. And it may be, and it certainly is in my experience in the extracurricular stuff we're doing. I mean, I'm working with 25 Asian Pacific Rim University students in a special program right now across the 25 students from 25 different universities. I put them into small groups in rooms. Immediately a Chilean is talking to a Chinese student, or someone from Hong Kong talking to someone from Australia. Was that going to happen in a traditional classroom? No, probably not. So I'm kind of hoping that this restructuring and the way we think about letting students engage with each other, even if it's just brief, is going to be the beginning of an opening of conversations and relationships that would not otherwise have happened. That's one of the opportunities that I see. And I'm really excited about that, actually, because now that I've seen it happening myself and really, really at a high level of engagement on cultural issues and other, I'm confident that this can be the beginning of relationship building on our campus.
Brilliant, thank you. Martin, please, can you add a little about how this tallies with your research?
It's an observation. If you currently work in business at the moment and thinking about, the kind of smart business model post-COVID, everybody in business is looking to universities. They're even using the term campuses, precincts. They talk about labs, studios, blended learning, closed webinars. And I think it's interesting that, for years, academia has spent its time being bothered about, or by business saying you must be more commercial, you must be more focused on kind of aims and objectives and outcomes. And here we have now post-COVID, businesses saying, well, where do we look to learn about the best way to deliver this new kind of open-ended collaborative communication? Well, gosh, oh, look, it's universities. So a lot of the models I'm seeing architects work with, and a lot of the businesses actually I'm working with at the moment, I'm taking them to campuses and I'm looking at universities and structural model there and saying, this is how business will work and collaborate in the future, not in these kind of great, phallic symbol head offices, but in kind of scattered precincts, federated teaching positions, et cetera, et cetera. So I kind of feel that for once universities should just hold off and wait, because actually history will at last come around to meet them and to understand that this is how the things will and could look in the future. When I chat to business people, they say, my gosh, if I could describe a model, it would look like a university. And when I talk to students, that's how they see the future potentially panning out. So I think there is a point in waiting to think about how these things can look, but also, to Peter's point, there are certain things we can take forward, those kind of structural institutional things to get rid of, but there are also things we need to preserve. Think about the balance between public space, serendipitous moments, and private reflection. This is what businesses are now building in as a consequence of Zoom and all of those technologies that sit around us. So we really just need to perhaps take a more long-term view of how these things will pan out, rather than rush into, changing the future.
Great, thank you. Yes, we must remain editorially neutral as always, but I think we are acutely aware at THE about how some politicians talk about universities' function and what universities actually do.
Yes. Anyway,
moving on. Skylar, it'd be interesting as a supplier to hear your thoughts on this. Because obviously you are tuned to how universities are changing their offering for international students, but you're also aware of things from a business and a transaction.
Yeah, sure. I mean, honestly, everything I'm hearing today and everything we see is moving towards more personalization, right? I mean, that's everything that has been done, right? It's whether it's the office hours in local time zones or on the appropriate applications of WeChat instead of Google, and everything being talked about. And that's what these students are used to, right? I mean, these students are used to personalized experiences. They grew up on their mobile phone. They're used to WeChat. They're used to Amazon, and they want a personalized experience. And I think that's what the universities are setting themselves up to offer even more so than before, because they are open now to the idea that somebody may want to be fully hybrid, and that's okay. And somebody else might want it 50-50. And some classes may run half their class, in the classroom, and some may not. And so I think it's that highly personalized experience that's really going to cater to the international students, because they are so different. They don't look like the rest of the student body. And many of them have different experiences and are coming in. And so as you guys are thinking about, pulling them into your culture, right? That personalized experience is where digital can play a part, right? And where I think it really gets exciting is where you take the data, you take the technology, you connect it all together, and you get that hyper connectivity in the future where, you guys really do have that, next gen campus, an experience that's intelligent and that is seamlessly integrated, where we're pinging students right on their phone and sending them push notifications about the lecture for the day, or allowing them to sit and have the chatbot speak to them in their local language and interact more. And I think as that starts to come more into that physical space, Alistair, that becomes really exciting, I think, and I kind of share some of the excitement on the phone of how that's going to evolve. We've also seen some things that aren't going to go away from a physical perspective. We have a US school who we work with who throughout COVID has designated 9 global centers in various countries, right? And they've enabled these WeWork locations around the world where students can convene and collaborate and study, or just hang out in country. Well, having those spaces is definitely going to alter and really build that hybridity model that some of these international students are wanting. For right now, it's great. They do want to interact with the Canadian students or the US students that they're coming to, but they can have kind of the best of both worlds a little bit. And there's really been some great things put in place this last year that's personalizing the experience.
Great, thank you very much. The time's flown by and we're coming into our last 10 minutes now. We're going to try and take some questions from the audience. There's about 200 people in attendance, so thank you all very much for joining us. It's been great to have that level of interaction. Just to note, there's been quite a few questions to you, Camille, about sort of the particulars of some of these case studies that you mentioned about the, particularly around the quarantining and the gamification software. I think rather than get you to list all the details now, we might try and make that information available after the webinar, just so we don't get too tied up in it and you're not asked to recall a lot of information on the spot. Skylar, one of the questions was about how there may be some jurisdictional changes around sort of the nuts and bolts of transferring money and things like that. I think it's something that's quite a good question to ask Western Union, because obviously it's your area of expertise. Do you think that there will be any, have you seen any examples of policy changes across North America that could make it more difficult to transfer funds to international students?
Yeah, look, it differs country by country and it changes so quickly, Alistair. So there's definitely some jurisdictions where we know international students have a harder time paying money, especially some of the sanctioned countries, right? Those are always a challenge. We hear from those from our universities often. But ultimately, I think global trade in general is an enabler for businesses, right? It allows them to increase demand and get more students into their universities. And it allows, and so it's not going to go away. I think it will be there. And I think we should see some of the regulations in various jurisdictions support that. I think initially here you may see some things change as people have changed foreign policy initially, but it should go back and it should open up, but it will remain country by country. Obviously with, in the US with some of the political changes, I think it'll be interesting to see how some of that plays out. But I think it depends, and I know that's a hard answer, but globally, every jurisdiction's a little bit different.
No, that's absolutely fine. We've had a few questions about how to sort of particular cases for improving personalised learning and individual support to the learners. If I may, it seems that the common answer among the panelists was that the key to that lies in building the interpersonal connections on campus, both within the peer group and also the other points that Rob and also Camille and Peter were talking about, is the level of collaboration that is now enabled by everything shifting to online. So just to cover off a couple of the more specific questions that we've had. Peter, we had one to asking about your earlier point about swaying too much towards assessment around project-based learning and moving away from the traditional exam model. Somebody asked, how did you reset that balance, and how did you sort of find the happy medium and an assessment model that was working for everyone?
I'm not sure we have found it yet, because because it was something that just emerged. Because of course, the issues of trying to run exams in online courses are challenging, and we know that. So there was a sort of a general shift away from it. What I think we've done is, just by raising that awareness with professors, we've asked them to take that into consideration, and to also think about how if you're setting lots of exercises and you have lots of deadlines, being more flexible. And we've also relaxed a lot of our academic regulations, which giving students more flexibility on deadlines, and when they can if they do feel that they have to withdraw for a class, sort of extending that time where they can do that without having it impact on their transcript. So I think we've done a lot of things. I think, given that we're just into the into February of our term started in January, we'll start seeing whether or not we've been able to do that, because midterms, the traditional time for midterm exams will start coming up, and we'll see if we're getting the same issues that students were complaining about last time. But it was one of the unexpected impacts on students that we didn't anticipate when we did shift to a more online environment.
Great. Well, I think it's really important to acknowledge those challenges. We've got a couple of minutes left, so I'd just like to put a single question to the entire panel, and perhaps Martin, you can answer from the response of what you found in your research, and Skylar from a supply point of view. If there was one thing that you had to really lobby to keep on the other side of all of this, what would it be?
I think undoubtedly it's face-to-face communications, increased personalization, but also, I think, to Camilla's point rather, about the serendipity and those chance encounters that happen either on campus or offsite, but within a new culture that really drives, I think, new thinking, new opportunity, new ways of being and doing. And a lot of the students we spoke to really were clear about why they chose the international experience. It was about the exchanges that happened, both the kind of the tacit, explicit, the social, the cultural, the learning, and that was seen as a vital part of how they judged the sense of experience they had out of it. And when I spoke to this group last week, I said to them, how has that changed? He said, well, it hasn't. We've now just pushed that up to the fore, that will become the thing we will rate the university on. Its experience, what it delivers, but also the serendipity that we get when we are there, in terms of how that teaches us to engage differently with new cultures. So that would be the thing that I think, again, universities do this. Let's not discard it simply because new things have asked us to change the way we would have run things in the past. The past can have answers and solutions to the problems of the future.
Right, thank you. Rob?
Yeah, I think in a teaching and learning environment, and I mean, we had a lot of conversation about the, sort of outside the classroom. One thing that I hope remains is, look, faculty, staff, we all took risks to do things differently. We didn't know what was going to happen. We had to, right? Maybe it wasn't even taking risks. Maybe it was just necessary. The reality is, some of it worked, some of it didn't. But we learned that trying new things could lead to some really cool innovations, could lead to better engagement of students, could open doors to learning that weren't there before. I hope what we'll keep from this is putting away of a risk aversion to trying new things in the classroom and out. If we stay fixed on our goal that we want to engage international students, bring them more in, not just into the learning environment, but more into relationship with each other, if we've learned anything over the past 12 months, is that we need to try things. And it's okay to try, and then just to step back and say, that didn't work, Let's try something else. And so the innovative spirit, which I'm fairly new to academia, it's a really conservative place. It's a really risk-averse place. And I think we've taught ourselves and learned that we can take risks and things aren't going to fall apart. And I hope we'll continue to experiment with ways to engage international students.
Okay, we're tight for time, but Camille, if I can come to you next.
Yep. I just want to point out the words that are above Skylar's head there. I don't want to lose the opportunities that this online connectivity has brought to us, that we've learned more about our international students in their home countries, that if we continue to have a robust online offering, it opens up these doors for these online exchanges, for course exchanges, for co-teaching of courses globally that we never would have had before in the past. Because as Rob was saying, like, we did an experiment. And so now we know what the connectivity brings to us and those opportunities. And I don't want to let go of those opportunities, that we now have an opportunity to connect with international students wherever they are. And we know not all international students can afford the cost to migrate to a new country, to travel. And all of them can't afford the cost for the entire year of tuition. But can they participate in one course with our domestic students as well? Can they participate in a co-taught course that we now have proven that we can do, synchronous, asynchronous connections, so that you can have a multinational class? Those are all opportunities that have been a result of this pandemic, and I'm not ready to let go of that.
Brilliant, thank you. And Peter?
Well, all of the above. I think that you know, Rob's point is the key one. I mean, there's lots of things that I'd like to keep, particularly around the hybrid teaching and the integration of mixed learning pedagogies. But actually, the point Rob mentioned, which is about being prepared to take risks and recognize how we can, move forward and use these opportunities is really the big thing for me. This week I gave a report to my board and Senate, and something that hit me that I think summed it all up was a part of the poem that Amanda Gorman said at President Biden's inauguration. I'll read it. I won't do it justice, but it says, so while once we asked, how could we possibly prevail over catastrophe? Now we assert, how could catastrophe possibly prevail over us? We will not march back to what was, but move to what shall be. And that to me sums it up. If we just go back to where we were, then this will have been a rather awful waste of time. And the thing is that we need to move forward and use this. And I think there's so many ways that we can build on this and make something good come out of this whole tragedy of COVID.
Excellent, thank you. Skylar, I'll let you finish us off with your thoughts.
Oh, Alistair, I don't know how I could possibly, these guys were so eloquent in their words and have covered so much. I mean, I think for me, it's a lot of agreement, right? I'd love to see the spirit of innovation continue. I want to see the hybridity and the personalization, the one size doesn't fit all model continue, create, the consumer market has already created the hyper customized customer experience. People are used to that, and please bring that into the education world. It's what international students want. It's what they desire. And I think it's really exciting. So don't go backwards.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, we'll have to end things there. Apologies for running over. It's been a really fascinating discussion. I think we've covered a huge amount in just over an hour. And just to let everyone watching know that we will put an on-demand version of this online. It'll be completely ungated. There'll also be a summary article, and we'll probably put in some of the particulars about the case studies people were asking about into that summary article for reference. So I'd like to thank the panel for joining me very much. Rob, Skylar, Camille, Peter, Martin, thank you all very much for your time, and I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I did.